Homeless people had taken up residence in an abandoned warehouse surrounded by an old fence. They had been living there for a long time, setting up rooms for themselves. Among the residents was Andy, a 29-year-old who had considered this place home for many years. He shared the modest shelter with 15 other people. Although conflicts arose, the vagrants remained united. There were no alcoholics or worse among them. "Bob has already had a fever for 3 days straight. I'll get some medicine," Andy said firmly. "They won't help us. We're treated worse than dogs," another homeless man said hopelessly. "That's not true. Volunteers are noble people who help us from the heart. Without them, so many of our people would be lost." Andy trusted the volunteers and accepted their help. For many years, the centre had been treating the homeless, providing them with food and shelter, although there weren't many sleeping spots available. Many homeless people did not believe in selfless work and refused to accept help, even in such situations. Andy was more open and sociable. So many people in the city knew him. The volunteers treated him well, and even his close friend was among them. They had met Leela 7 months ago when she worked in the kitchen for the homeless, serving hot lunches on plates. The girl sincerely treated every dirty and bad-smelling person who reached out for food, showing no disgust or aversion. "Your work deserves respect," Andy once remarked when it was his turn to receive a portion of pea soup. "Oh no, I'm not doing anything special," she answered with a shy smile. Leela did not seek praise or admiration. She believed she could help the underprivileged and never missed her shift. Andy's neat appearance surprised her. He never neglected hygiene, regularly showered at the centre, wore clean clothes, and helped his fellow unfortunates. A certain bond quickly grew between the two young people. They communicated easily, often joked and laughed. Leela brought books for Andy and shared her favourite music with him on her player. Sympathy was evident, but neither of them admitted it. Leela's colleagues often noticed her glances at Andy and expressed concern, saying, "Leela, you don't need him. He's not a bad guy, but what future do you have with him? He needs to become a man first, find a stable job, and learn to live in society. What can he offer you?" "I know," Leela sighed, "but that doesn't make it any easier. I'm drawn to him. I can't help it, even though I know it's not a good idea." When Andy arrived at the volunteer centre, he was greeted with pleasure, asked about others, and shared news. "This is an antipyretic. It should help," said the nurse. "It's very effective. What are his other symptoms?" "He's been coughing and has a headache." "You should have come to us sooner. I'll see what medication is left. And he should definitely get medical advice. By the way, a woman asked for you. Go to Paul. He'll provide you more information." Andy was intrigued. Strangers rarely showed interest in him, especially women, and frankly speaking, he had never been pursued by romantic love or had a serious relationship. When he saw this woman for the first time, Andy couldn't believe it. She turned out to be a stunning young woman, around 26 years old, had a stylish short haircut, wearing a t-shirt adorned with rhinestones and leather pants. Large earrings adorned her ears and a small purse hung from her shoulder. As soon as she spotted Andy, she stood up from her seat and waved at him. "Good afternoon. Why do you need me?" asked Andy. "Hello," replied the guest, extending her hand for a shake. "I'm Marilyn. You're probably surprised by my appearance, but don't be afraid. I'm not from any service." "It sounds strange. Why all of a sudden do you need me?" Andy looked at the unfamiliar beauty with disbelief. "The thing is, I started donating to this centre not long ago, so I couldn't help but be interested in its wards, so to speak. First of all, Paul told me about you. You're young and good-looking, and unlike your fellows, you don't spoil your life with stuff like alcohol." "I haven't had a lot of bad luck in life like others," Andy said, becoming serious. "Many people who drown their sorrows in alcohol have seen a lot, and it's not for you or me to judge them." "I see," Marilyn smiled awkwardly, realizing her gaffe. "You may not believe me, but I'm interested in you. You don't look like a homeless person. You look good, like a normal person. I didn't mean to offend you." She immediately managed. "I apologize for the careless words." Andy didn't understand what was going on. Why was some rich woman interested in him? Why praise him or apologize to him? Such a thing was almost uncharacteristic of people in her circle. Andy had met with such people before. They did not count the homeless as people and treated them as if they were garbage. However, Marilyn, she behaved differently. She was different. "I was struck by how conscientious you are," Marilyn continued. "People like you bring back the faith that things can still be fixed. People don't dare to support volunteers. They think that charity is a scam and that the organisers are just pocketing their money. Now I see my donation is going to a good cause. I wanted you, as the most conscientious among your friends, to encourage them to live a normal life. If you get a job and get cured of all addictions, I thought it would be a great example and encouragement to them." Andy knew that some of the wealthy sponsors were involved in supporting volunteer organisations only for the sake of their own image or tax reduction, but they did not interact directly with the homeless. Marilyn seemed smart and sensitive, and it was even strange that a woman dressed so daringly could sympathise with someone and genuinely be eager to help the underprivileged. "Would you mind going out to lunch with me?" Marilyn brought him back to reality. "Everyone is looking at us here, and I'd like to get to know you better." Andy was confused because Layla, who was standing nearby, heard her words. He looked at his friend, afraid that she would be against his walk with Marilyn, but Layla only nodded with a barely perceptible smile. Even if she was jealous, she had no right to forbid him anything. With a heavy heart, Andy decided to go with Marilyn to the cafe. In a gorgeous red car, he was afraid to touch anything. Marilyn drove confidently but smoothly. Even though her companion felt timid next to her and was well-groomed and well-to-do, it did not matter to her. She did not treat Andy with condescension. Soon Marilyn parked in front of a chic establishment with glass windows. Inside there were round tables with lamps hanging low over them. Each of them was covered with a white tablecloth and a vase of fresh flowers on top. Cosy sofas were with velvet cushions. Andy had never been near such establishments. Their employees usually chased away vagrants, so they wouldn't dare bother their well-to-do customers. "This place is delicious. You'll love it," winked Marilyn. "I'm sure I will," the man muttered, his heart racing. Andy once again felt like a homeless kid who couldn't afford anything but a stiff bun and a glass of tea. "Don't worry," Marilyn remarked, seeing his confusion. "I've invited you, so I'm paying. It's not difficult for me, so choose whatever you like." The woman confidently called the waiter, ordering one dish after another. Just the names made Andy's stomach twist with hunger spasms. Soon several plates with various dishes and glasses of red wine could hardly fit on the table. "Shall we drink a little to get acquainted?" Marilyn suggested. "I'm not a fan myself, but a good drink will relax you." "Thank you, I don't drink," Andy objected, but still gave in to the entreaties. He didn't feel comfortable forcing Marilyn to fuss with him. The wine really distracted Andy from his anxious thoughts. He was able to forget about his position and Marilyn's status. The conversation flowed easily, and the topics came up naturally. It was a long time since he had felt so free when talking to someone who was an outsider. "You look a lot like my ex-husband, David," she shared. "True, in character you are quite different. I loved him very much and did not notice the obvious. He was a womanizer and a traitor," said Marilyn sadly, looking away. "He cheated on me with his secretary. Can you imagine? And she got pregnant. I didn't even know he wanted a child until his girlfriend showed up at our apartment. She started telling me how long David had been cheating on me with her, that he was afraid to divorce me. I was shocked." Marilyn stopped trying to suppress the tears. Andy was struck by her frankness. A glass of wine had had an effect on her. "I'm sorry this happened to you. Even though I've only known you for a couple of hours, You don't deserve to be treated like this. I don't understand why people can't be honest with each other. Why can't people work things out humanely? Admit you're in love with someone else and then ask for a divorce. Things happen in life, I know, but it's important to be human. I may disappoint you, but I want to get back at him. It hurts me to accept betrayal, and you can help me. Marilyn looked at him pleadingly. Please listen. Nothing serious will be required of you. I just want to introduce you to my friends and attend a couple of events together as if we are in love. I want people to see us together, you know? I want people to realize that I'm not alone anymore, that I haven't grieved long after my divorce, and I've already moved on. What kind of fiancé am I? Look at me. I don't belong in high society, and my manners are so bad, I will definitely give myself away. Andy was frightened. Now he understood why Marilyn had paid attention to him. It's not a problem. With my money, I'll fix you up in no time. You'll look like a noble. I only need to post pictures with you on social networks to let everyone know about us, and nothing else. It won't affect you at all, and I really need it. Andy didn't like the idea at all, but the wine confused his thoughts. He couldn't agree, but he also couldn't refuse. Marilyn was very persistent. She looked at Andy so tearfully that he gave in. Okay, I'll go along with it, but not for long. I'm not losing anything, am I? He replied with a sigh. That's right, sweetie. You'll even like it. She winked at him. Since Andy had agreed to help, he had a new life. At first, that same day, he went to the hospital for a medical checkup. Don't take offence, it's better for both of us, insisted Marilyn. I want to know who I'm letting into my home. I understand. I'm not offended at all because that's actually good for me. It's been a long time since I've been to a doctor. I don't have access to such an examination. Marilyn's house turned out to be gorgeous. It was a 2-story modern house, furnished with the latest technology. Inside, there was no unnecessary decor. Everything was in its place. Comfortable furniture, fine pile carpets, and light-coloured walls. Wow, did you really earn it yourself? Andy gasped, not thinking that he was asking an indecent question. You're funny, she laughed, seeing nothing special in her luxury. I inherited money from my parents, so I don't have to worry about it. Choose any room on the 2nd floor. Everything is prepared for your comfort. You can use all the appliances and take whatever you want from the fridge. I'm away a lot, so you'll have to find your own entertainment. There's a pool in the backyard. You can swim. Collapsing onto the wide bed with the orthopedic mattress in his new bedroom, Andy couldn't believe his luck. Had he really gotten himself into such a mess? And would he at least live a luxurious life for a little while? Marilyn turned out to be very kind and attentive to him. For an orphan who had escaped from an orphanage many years ago, such an arrangement seemed incredibly surreal. Andy remembered perfectly his hungry childhood when he first found himself on the streets. They tried to involve him in many illegal activities, but his intuition had saved him many times from danger. Even though he did not like to be involved in dubious things, he was ready to help Marilyn. Meanwhile, she took good care of Andy. She started taking him to beauty salons for manicures, pedicures, and spa treatments to improve his skin and body. She even made him do sports with a personal trainer. I feel like a Hollywood star, Andy often repeated when he was surrounded by lots of beauty specialists, and Marilyn critically examined their work. This must be like a movie scene for you, Marilyn smiled kindly at him. We'll stop by my ex-boyfriend's hairdresser today. We need to fix your unruly hair. At the barber shop, there was a conflict that made Andy question Marilyn's true character. When the barber started shaving Andy's temples and the back of his head for a trendy haircut, leaving long hair on top, Andy protested. It doesn't suit me at all. Do modern men really walk around like this? I do everything you ask, but this haircut is absolutely ridiculous. It's necessary for business. Marilyn cut him off, not willing to hear any further objections. But it's my body, isn't it? The reflection I see is not me. I don't like it. I don't want to be a laughingstock. Andy, don't argue. The haircut will be how I want it, and you'll just have to deal with it, Marilyn replied with irritation, reading something important on her phone. This statement offended Andy. Despite Marilyn apologizing for her harshness on the way home, he couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something. He didn't fully believe her words. An unpleasant feeling started to grow inside him. Perhaps Marilyn had a clear plan in which he was just an unwilling pawn. Andy shared his suspicions with Leela. At first, it was not easy for him to communicate with her. Considering he was living in the house of an attractive stranger, he felt guilty about something and didn't want to impose. "This whole thing seemed suspicious to me from the start," Leela said. "What do you mean?" Andy frowned like a child. "You see, rich women don't usually need—" "Homeless? I know, without reminding you, that I'm not her equal. For your information, I'm not trying to marry her," Andy replied, feeling offended. Leela quickly tried to calm him down. "Andy, you know that's not what I meant. It's not about you, it's about her. People like her can't be trusted. People like her are dangerous. Be on your guard. You never know what she's plotting." Leela said the last word with disdain, which didn't go unnoticed by Andy. "I miss you. I miss our conversations so much," he confessed suddenly. "As soon as I finish with her request, we'll meet right away," Andy promised, and felt relieved after talking to Leela. He no longer believed everything he saw or heard. Instead of arguing with Marilyn, he became more compliant and immediately agreed to her ideas. But now Andy started to secretly observe her when she wasn't looking. He tried to eavesdrop on her phone conversations to learn more about Marilyn as a person. If she wanted to introduce him to her and David's friends, why hadn't anyone close to her come to her house during this week? Why all the secrecy? Andy wanted to be cautious and not make a fool of himself. If Marilyn posed any danger to him, he had to find out. One day, Andy was looking in the kitchen for a mixer to make dinner and accidentally found the receipts for the house rent in one of the cupboards. He was extremely surprised. Wasn't the house really Marilyn's property? Why had she lied to him? Why does she need such a big house for herself if she doesn't even bring anyone to it? It didn't go unnoticed by Marilyn that Andy had found the letter from the landlord. After dinner, she knocked on his bedroom door and offered to talk over a glass of good wine. "I have something to tell you," she confessed guiltily. "I understand you need an explanation. I'm not as rich as I said I was. David and his mistress fooled me, but I wasn't ashamed to admit it, even to you. I rented this house because I can't afford to buy one yet, and all my friends are fake. They're just gloating. That's how it is in this world. And I didn't want to seem abandoned or broken. I couldn't let David humiliate me like that. I really need you. I shouldn't have kept it from you, but please stay." Marilyn looked at him pleadingly. He didn't know what to say. He felt ashamed that the girl before him was justifying herself while he had suspected her of insincerity. She trusted him, and he had betrayed that trust. "I'm the one who needs to apologize to you. I had no right to snoop around your house and invade your privacy. I'm sorry, but you can count on me." Later, when Andy recounted his conversation with Marilyn to Leila, she got angry. "Andy, she's leaning on you. I'm really worried about you," Leila said in desperation, trying to awaken her friend's suspicion. "We had an honest, open conversation, and now I have a different opinion of her. Marilyn won't do anything bad to me. She herself is going through a betrayal and has sunk almost to the bottom." Since then, Andy and Marilyn's relationship has changed. They began to spend more time together as friends, not just companions. They even did household chores together. Marilyn stopped pretending that she could afford to pay a cleaning company regularly. Gradually, Andy became less embarrassed about his background and felt more confident when interacting with new people. He observed how Marilyn communicated with staff in restaurants and conducted business over the phone. He saw how demanding she could be, and he also wanted to grow up and earn the respect of others. "Maybe, after meeting me, you'll be able to realize yourself in society," she said with a smile, teaching Andy about manners. "Don't slouch, that doesn't attract anyone. And don't smile like a fool. You should exude power, wealth and confidence. Currently you look like a boy. You need to create an image for yourself and follow it. Then people will start taking you seriously." "You're smart," Andy admitted, although he often found Marilyn's lectures boring. According to her, he did everything wrong. Marilyn criticized his habits, facial expressions, and the positions of his hands and feet. She demanded that he replicate everything exactly as she did. One day, Marilyn woke Andy up early. "I need your help," she said, almost crying. "I ask of you because I won't be able to do it myself." "Yes, I'm listening," Andy responded as he stretched and got up from the comfortable bed. "I need you to go to the bank today to withdraw some money. David and I shared an account. When he left for his mistress, he withdrew all the money without my knowledge and then boasted to me that he had hidden it safely in his safe deposit box. That's precisely what I need your help with. I just want the justice to prevail. I want you to take my half of the money. I don't want his money, but he had no right to take my half and leave me with nothing. You have nothing to fear. You're an exact copy of David. They know you well at this bank because you are their VIP client. Look, I just want to punish David for ruining me and our love, and taking his money is the best revenge." "Okay, I'll try," Andy agreed, but he felt very uncomfortable inside. But he couldn't refuse Marilyn because he felt he was internally indebted to her for all her efforts and good attitude. Keeping everything Marilyn taught him in mind, Andy entered the bank office. "Good afternoon, David. It's been a long time since you've visited us." Mr. Cox, the head manager, greeted him. "Hello, I've had some matters to attend to," Andy answered, taking off his sunglasses with a deliberate gesture as Marilyn had taught him. "I'd like to check my safe deposit box." "Of course, David. Just please provide the passphrase. We trust you, but we've increased security due to a risk in fraud. Everyone, even our most important and valued clients, must go through this procedure." Mr. Cox obligingly spoke with a broad smile. Andy couldn't hide his surprise. Marilyn hadn't warned him about a passphrase. What was it, anyway? Suddenly, Andy felt a knot in his stomach. He realized that something was not going according to plan. "I need to make a phone call," Andy said, reverting to being the awkward boy and vagabond he had been years ago. At that moment, Mr. Cox, who suspected something was wrong, pressed the panic button. Marilyn didn't answer the phone. Andy started sweating, noticing how other bank employees were squinting at him. Suddenly, someone approached him from behind and a stern voice said, "Stop where you are. Hands behind your head." Before Andy knew it, he had been restrained. His expensive cell phone fell to the glossy floor. From a nearby parked car, Marilyn watched as Andy was led out of the bank building in handcuffs and placed into a police car. She pressed her lips together in frustration, realizing that the plan had failed. Now she could only hope that the police wouldn't connect her to the vagrant who had attempted to gain access to the millionaire's safe deposit box. "What's going on? Where are you taking me?" Andy struggled in the hands of the police. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You're accused of fraud," said a stern voice belonging to the investigator. Detective Benson specialized in scams and fraud, and his team always reacted quickly to such calls. Alarm buttons in banks often saved people from grand theft and sometimes even saved lives. "So," Detective Benson began in the interrogation room, "you have no documents with you. Your name doesn't tell us anything either. Who are you? I want to warn you, you may have big problems if you continue to claim that you know nothing." "But I'm really not a scum, and I didn't mean any harm. I came to collect money that rightfully and justly belonged to the deceived wife. Her name is Marilyn, and her last name... God, I don't even know her last name." Andy panicked even more. "She said it's an ordinary procedure. I didn't know it wasn't allowed. and I didn't know I was doing anything illegal. I would never have overstepped the law." Mr. Cox, who was watching the interrogation from the other side of the glass in the meeting room, explained to another policeman, "He's lying. This crook is dressed exactly like our client David Rutherford. The thing is, they really look alike. And he even copied his gestures, manner of speech, and style of dress. It's a clear fraud. It's just outrageous. What a fool you have to be to try something like this." "Mr. Cox, calm down. The theft has been prevented thanks to your vigilance." Meanwhile, Andy was completely confused. He began to recover from the shock, and his consciousness started to piece together what had happened. Marilyn had set him up. Leela was right. It was impossible to believe. From the very beginning, she had paid attention to him for a reason, but because of his resemblance to some millionaire. She was cruel, calculating, mean, and ruthless. Until your mysterious Marilyn is found, you are Andy, the main suspect. I advise you not to hide anything from me. As far as I know, there's no one to vouch for you. Your past lifestyle does not inspire any confidence." Andy deeply regretted that he had fallen for Marilyn's assumed kindness and tearful story. Andy knew perfectly well that people like him had bad endings in situations like this. Leela was horrified when she heard what had happened. She was alarmed that Andy had stopped contacting her. She didn't know where he lived because Marilyn was against visitors, and during the time that Andy had been at her house, Leela had not seen him. They were only connected by phone calls, which have stopped now. Leela couldn't find peace. She knew that something had happened to Andy, and soon there was a call from the police station. "My God, Andy, are you all right? Did they hurt you there? Did they force you to sign a confession?" Leela couldn't stop asking. She was relieved that she could at last hear his voice. "I'm all right, relatively," Andy answered weakly. "I'm scared, although I know men don't admit to such things. I'm a poor man. No one will believe me. The cops are just trying to frame me, close the case and get a bonus." "You need a good lawyer, but where can we get the money?" Leela grabbed her head. "I'll borrow some. I'll ask the guys from the centre to take part in it, and we'll get you out. I won't let them put you in jail," she repeated through her tears. Soon, Leela came across an article on the internet from the city community, which stated that a homeless man pretended to be a millionaire to empty his safe deposit box. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw a picture of that wealthy man, who looked extremely similar to Andy. After finding out more about David Rutherford, Leela learned that 4 months ago he had been in a terrible accident and fell into a coma, and soon she appeared on the doorstep of his parents' house. "Get away from here. Another journalist is looking for sensationalism," David's father shouted at her. No, I'm not a journalist. That's why I'm here. Please listen. Your son has a twin brother, and he's in prison. There has been a terrible mistake. An innocent man may go to prison for someone else's crime, and he may be your son." Something in Leela's words made Mr. Rutherford stop, and he allowed her to enter. "David was not our biological child," Mrs. Rutherford said, wiping her tears with a handkerchief. "We adopted him when he was 2 years old. We had no idea that he had a brother." David's adoptive parents looked at the pictures of Andy on Leela's phone and could not believe their eyes. "So it's true, then? The man they detained at the bank isn't a professional con man?" "I swear, Andy is a very good man, but he's too naive. No one can help him but you. If you knew him personally, you would never believe he would do such a thing. He has lived most of his life on the streets, but he has never stolen, and shares the little money he has with his friends and leads an honest life. Such people are rare among the homeless, believe me." The compassionate hearts of Mr. and Mrs. Rutherford trembled. They decided to visit the police out of curiosity to see David's potential brother. "My God, they really look identical," sobbed Mrs. Rutherford when she saw Andy. "Honey, we have to get him out at any cost. He seems to be the only relative of our David. We cannot let him be treated like this." But we don't know what kind of a person he is. Leela's story is not enough. I can see that she is genuinely concerned about him, but that's not the main thing," Mr. Rutherford replied. After the conversation with the investigator, many things became clearer for the Rutherfords. So far, Andy is the only suspect. Marilyn, who, according to him, is behind the Rutherfords, could not be found. She made a donation to a volunteer centre for the homeless, but her details turned out to be false. She was obviously well prepared, and the fact that Andy knew nothing about her except her name made it even harder. The investigator said, "So Andy is just a pawn, right?" Mr. Rutherford clarified. "We'll hire the best lawyer for him and get him released on bail. While you're working tirelessly, an innocent man is sitting behind bars, and the real swindler is walking free." Andy spent about another week in jail, and then he was released on bail. When Andy was released, Leela threw himself around his neck right in the courtroom. "Thank God you're free now," she clung to her friend. "I was so worried. I couldn't eat or sleep." "Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for not giving up on me. I was such an idiot to fall for the fairy tales of a beautiful life. I don't need anything without you." "There seems to be something we don't know." Mr. Rutherford coughed tactfully into his fist. Leela quickly stepped back from Andy and adjusted her clothes. "Andy, these are your alleged twin brothers' parents. They are the ones who got you out from behind bars." Thank you so much." Mrs. Rutherford couldn't help but hug Andy, as if he were her own son. "We are overjoyed that you are now free. We didn't know you existed." She and her husband offered Andy a place to live in the house where David had grown up. At first it was awkward for them to communicate, but they overcame it. They showed him pictures of his brother and told him about his life growing up. "I didn't know about David's existence. Why wasn't I told anything? I was too young to remember him. Why were we separated?" Andy wondered. He was amazed at how differently his and his brother's lives had turned out. "We should talk to the headmistress of the orphanage. She is quite active and is aware of the lives of her students," Mrs. Rutherford suggested. "I don't know if it was legal for them to keep you from us, but what she did was inhumane. She deprived you of the opportunity to grow up in our family. We would have taken both of you. David was such a lovely baby." Mrs. Morland, the director of the orphanage, was about to leave her office. It was clear that she took personal pride in the successful lives of her pupils and graduates. One wall was adorned with portraits of accomplished persons, including David Rutherford. Throughout her many years in this position, Mrs. Morland had witnessed a great deal. She believed that she was doing an excellent job by pursuing what she considered to be the right policies. When David's parents entered her office, she immediately recognized them, but mistook Andy for David. "I'm very proud of your son," she said in an ingratiating tone, knowing that there were wealthy people in front of her. "David, you were such a clever boy." "Thank you, but I'm Andy, the very twin brother whose existence you didn't inform these people about. You illegally separated me and my brother." "Good heavens!" cried the headmistress, already struggling to bear the shocks of life, and collapsed into her chair. Grasping her heart, she wailed, "How could this be? Did fate try to bring you two together?" "Exactly, fate. There's no other way to put it," replied the angry Mrs. Rutherford. "I heard what happened to your David, but I thought he had recovered. What a tragedy. But at least now the family is all together." Mrs. Morland tried to salvage the situation. "You've almost lost one son, but gained a second. God is watching over your family." "How could you live peacefully knowing that you had ruined one child's life? Why did you keep him from us?" Mrs. Rutherford persisted. "We could have given him a better life. He wouldn't have had to wander the streets feeling so lonely. He had a brother, his own flesh and blood, and you took that away from him." Forgive me, Mrs. Morland cried, taking her hand. "I have done this to other children too. Many families before you refused to adopt both siblings, so both stayed with us. But I wanted to do what was best, to give at least one of the brothers a chance to find a family. I understand how tragic your fate was after you ran away. I understood you were wandering the streets, but please forgive me. I am guilty before you. Mrs. Morland's tears were interrupted by a phone call. It's my daughter. She's waiting for me downstairs. I'm just about to leave. Joan and I are in a hurry to catch her train. She's going to the capital on a business trip. I have to end our conversation. I'm really sorry. When Andy, accompanied by Mrs. and Mr. Rutherford, went outside, he froze in place. Standing next to the silver car was Marilyn. Only her hair was different, no longer dark and short. A light breeze was gently blowing through her long blonde strands. As soon as their eyes met, Marilyn started running. "Stop!" yelled Andy, startling David's parents. "Stop, you evil woman!" "Andy, where are you going?" shouted Mrs. Rutherford after him. Marilyn ran as if she were mad, but Andy was faster. He grabbed her arm, threw her to the ground, and held her down with his foot to prevent her from kicking. "I've got you, you swindler! Now you'll pay for everything!" Mrs. Morland, witnessing the scene, shouted in an unrecognizable voice. "What do you think you're doing? Quickly, let go of my daughter! Get your hands off her!" "She's your daughter?" Andy was surprised, looking into Marilyn's eyes, which were filled with tears. The police officers who arrived took Joan and Mrs. Morland with them, while the Rutherfords and Andy went to the police station in their car. "Now she won't escape," Andy said with indignation. Mrs. Rutherford held his hand, understanding the emotions he was experiencing. "Everything will be all right. The police will sort it out. She won't get away with it." Leela rushed to the police station as soon as she heard what had happened. Joan was taken in for questioning. Andy and his friend went outside to get some fresh air and clear their heads. "Don't think I've gone mad," Andy said softly, "but I wouldn't have been able to endure all of this if it weren't for you." "I couldn't act in any other way. You know that," said Leela. Andy took her hand and interlaced his fingers. "I know how you feel about me. You figured out your feelings a long time ago, and I had to go through all of this mess to admit it to myself. Leela, I like you. I really like you, and not just as a friend, but as a woman. I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner, and you had to wait so long." Leela, feeling embarrassed, buried her face in Andy's shoulder instead of answering. Being by Leela's side, Andy no longer worried, knowing that she genuinely cared about his well-being. Meanwhile, during the investigation, a fearful Joan realized the gravity of her actions. She discovered that Andy was not just a homeless man, but had the support of a millionaire family behind him. "So, Joan, you're the missing part in this story, right?" Detective Benson asked sternly as he sat down opposite her. "You were captured by the cameras at the volunteer centre on the day you met Andy. Additionally, you were recorded by the car's video recorder near the bank on the very same day when Andy, acting on your tip-off, attempted to access the contents of David Rutherford's safe deposit box." The investigator's harsh tone and the oppressive atmosphere of the interrogation room brought Joan, who was already emotionally unstable, to tears. "Yes, it's me. Andy had no idea. I don't want him to get hurt because of me. I didn't realize how serious it was. I know it sounds foolish. I understand that it's illegal, but I got confused at the moment and I acted on impulse," Joan confessed. The woman went on to provide a detailed story. "I worked in a cafe opposite that bank office, and I saw David Rutherford many times because he used to come in for coffee. One day my mother, who worked as the headmaster of the orphanage, told me terrible news about one of her wards, who had been adopted many years ago. She showed me his picture and I recognized David. Then my mother told me in confidence that he had a twin brother who had run away from the orphanage many years ago and had never been found. I didn't have any plans, but I decided to look around the shelters, and one day I saw Andy. That's when I had this stupid plan. I don't know what came over me. Something just kind of messed with my mind. Now I sincerely repent for what I did," Joan revealed. "I rented a cottage and a car to match my image as a wealthy girl. It was surprising to see how kind and polite he was. I had expected him to be dumb and drunk like a cork. I had prepared the story of the ex-husband in advance and rehearsed it in front of the mirror multiple times to sound convincing. I even learned how to cry on command. It wasn't difficult to charm Andy. He's truly a kind-hearted guy, sensitive but also very naive. He seemed like he had resigned himself to his homeless life. At some point he began to suspect that I was leading him on, but I played on his sympathy, melting his heart once again. In a way, we were in similar situations. He was living without a home, and I was supposedly deprived of it by my ex-husband." A criminal case was opened against Joan, and all of her testimonies were thoroughly examined. As a result, Andy was finally cleared of all charges. Joan awaited her first hearing while Andy and Leela spent most of their spare time at David's hospital. "Sometimes I'm scared by how similar you two are. Do you think he will wake up?" Leela asked in a hushed voice, brushing her hair away from David's forehead. "I really hope that you two recognize each other. Judging by his parents, you can tell they raised him to be a good man." "Yes, the kind of man who makes millions in his 29 years, Andy exclaimed. "He'll make me feel like a failure." "That's not true," Leela interrupted. "Don't ever talk about yourself like that. You haven't lived his life, and he hasn't lived yours. Please keep in mind that he grew up surrounded by love and affection, while you only received hardships from fate." As the lovers argued, David twitched his finger. His eyelashes fluttered, and his pulse quickened. "Oh my God, he's opened his eyes!" exclaimed Leela, and David quickly pressed the button to call the medics. A nurse rushed in and began to soothe David while monitoring his vitals. "David, you're in the hospital. Welcome back. You're awake from your coma," the nurse informed him. "Who is he?" wheezed David, pointing a trembling finger at his double. "You'd better leave," the nurse requested. But when Mr. and Mrs. Rutherford arrived at the hospital, they filled David in on everything. "I missed so much news." The man weakly smiled at his parents. Occasionally he glanced at his brother, hesitant to speak openly to him. "Don't be afraid of me. I'm used to having a twin, and this is a new experience for you," Andy said to David. "If it's difficult for you, I can stay away for a while. You have a lot to discuss with your family." No, stay. I just need to get used to it." After a thorough check for any lingering effects from the coma, David was deemed healthy, but he still needed some time under medical supervision. Every day his parents visited him, and now his brother and fiancé had joined them. "I hope you'll accept me as your best man," David winked at Andy after being discharged. "I'm as active now as I was before. I can sing and dance." "Of course, no one is closer to me than you." Soon Andy embarked on a new and fulfilling life. Having endured so many hardships, he hadn't expected things to turn out this way. He had a cosy, spacious house. David's parents treated him like their own son, and most importantly, he had Leela, who sincerely loved him. He had proposed to her quite unexpectedly after another shift at David's bedside while he was still in a coma. "I want to spend my whole life with you. I can't imagine being with any other girl," Andy confessed to his beloved during a walk along the embankment. "I love you very much. Please, Leela, be my wife. I promise you won't regret it." When Andy presented a modest ring in a blue velvet box, she cried out, "God, of course, yes, I agree." With a shaking hand, Andy slipped the ring onto Leela's finger and kissed her hand. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Only their closest friends were invited to their wedding. Many volunteers who knew Andy and Leela toasted to the happiness of the newlyweds. They also invited some homeless people to the wedding, ensuring they looked presentable. "I'll never forget where I was raised," Andy vowed to them, and he kept his word. Very soon David brought him into the business. They worked together seamlessly, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's actions. They complemented each other perfectly in their work and surprised each other with their ideas. Of course, this did not happen immediately, but thanks to the fact that David paid for his brother's education and personally trained him. Now, Andy, receiving a decent salary, regularly made donations to the Familiar Volunteer Centre. As for Leela, she didn't give up her voluntary work. Together, the couple organised dinners for the homeless during major holidays, providing everyone with useful gifts. At one of these events, Leela introduced David to her kind and sweet colleague, Holly. From then on, David became a frequent guest at the center.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias.
Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sarah tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sarah y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sarah quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sarah completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sarah se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sarah quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sarah era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber, los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sarah había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sarah llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Thyssen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Thyssen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche, me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado, dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche, no había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta, los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse, no hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marchen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sarah. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sarah era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sarah, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sarah. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sarah se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Sherry. Sherry alquilaba una habitación de Sarah. Cada centavo que Sarah ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Sherry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sarah no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Sherry explicó que Sarah estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí, pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Serry por $1 y obtuve $3.000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foote resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.